Slab Audio on music production and audio engineering. Welcome to Doc Slab Audio and our Insights series. I do believe this is the 14th video in our Insights series, and in this video we want to talk about our music audio engineers, actual engineers. So the reason I'm making this video, because I've addressed this quite a few times on my channel, and there's some sub playlists addressing this, but I wanted to kind of answer this question directly. So whenever we're talking about audio engineering as far as music production and audio engineering as far as engineering, to like you're building telephones, rocket ships, I don't know what all you might be doing with signal processing and audio engineering in those areas, lots of different things. But the concept here is that yes and no. So it really depends on how much you study. The more you understand about engineering audio and signal analysis, and processing of signals, the better you're going to be as an engineer working with music productions and understanding, what is actually applicable and what you're actually doing and what is actually happening when you, try to do anything with audio. So that's a given, right? But if we get down to the nitty gritty of it, that the answer is really that they're not, most of them. I mean, for the most part, you don't need the type of understanding of signals and processing and analysis and all the stuff that is possible to understand about that to do a music production. It's just not necessary, because you are focused on, it's like if you look at coding, there's different levels of coding whenever you're working with coding, and for different situations and different applications. And so, you're on an upper level of the coding tier that's a much more simplified level, if you look at it in that way, to work with music productions. So you don't really need to, understand all the levels to do music production. The more you understand about it, the better it is, but you really don't need it in a lot of cases. So, the answer is no and yes and no. It's kind of confusing, because if you Google engineer and start really digging around it, that engineers are dealing with a lot of times very scientific applications. And if you get into like list of engineering branches, there's lots of different branches of different types of engineering that I do not dissuade you from digging around on there, because it's quite enlightening. And it can actually help you find some subcategories that are actually directly related to audio and digital signal processing and analysis that you can dig around in and really have some fun. But when we get into it, we really start looking at, you'd want to Google and really dig in about signal processing and what all is involved with that, digital signal processing, and then you'd get into audio signal processing and its subcategories and audio analysis. Because by the time you spend some time digging around in there, you will eventually get to the audio engineer as per se that's dealing with music productions and what is pertinent in dealing with that. And there's a lot of times we get into other topics that are directly related, like acoustical engineering. We sometimes have to have some understanding of these concepts and principles so that we can have some understanding what's going on, right? In our environments, reverberation, spatialization, echo effect, all kinds of things. But, there's multiple subcategories of that the more you dig around. But as we get into it and really talk about the reality of it, is that if you really start digging into engineering as far as you start getting into it and you get into like signal processing and you really spend some time in signal processing and analysis and DSP, digital signal processing and analysis, that the deeper you get, you will come to an understanding that it's really sometimes not applicable to what you're doing. The environment is set up, the tools are set up, and everything's set up for you not have to deal with that and get focused on it on a much more upper level. Like we talked about, there's different levels of coding, so you don't have to deal with that stuff. You don't have to get in there and start coding stuff and understanding this formula and this algorithm, and this formula, and it's like you don't have to really get into it that deeply to be a production engineer dealing with music productions or an audio engineer dealing with them. It's not to say that I do not dissuade you to get into signal processing and start digging, as you have time, and digital signal processing. There's a lot of stuff about that in that download notebook in the Abouts tab that I put on this channel that'll eventually lead you into audio signal processing, its subcategories, audio analysis, you start just digging deeper. Audio, you eventually hit audio engineer as far as music productions, and acoustical engineering is fairly closely related, and you get a much better understanding of the levels that we're talking about, and it's like if you get in there and you Google that and you say, okay, levels of coding, and you get into levels in coding, there is different levels. So the different levels that you have, higher level, lower level, and these are, the programming languages are classified. Let's see if I can come up with it real quick, that there are different levels of it. And I don't know if it's going to show it here really quick, but there's 3 distinct levels that happen in coding. And if you Google it and you dig around a little bit, you'll find it. And it's the same way when we're dealing with audio engineering as far as music production, that there's only so much you're going to be able to do within a music production, and a lot of those things are not applicable. So that it's like you're working in a DAW instead of MATLAB or something like that, because you're really not going to be able to apply that. I mean, if I sat here and made a whole series about working in MATLAB with audio for music production, you'd be like, what, bro? What are you talking about? I'd be like, well, this formula and that, and then, it's like, well, that's what it is. You'd be like, what? I mean, it's like, because that's what it did to me. I was like, well, how the heck am I going to apply this in a music production? I mean, give me a break. I'm looking around my DAW, my DAW starts to look like something for little kids to play in. Whee! It's like, because it does sometimes. It's getting better and better and better and more professional looking and more geared to be more professional, but still, it's a lot of times you find yourself, trusting your ears, getting a general idea with your analysis tools in case you see serious problems or issues, and really trusting your ears when there's a problem there isn't, and getting really confident and comfortable with that. Because, you can put it in MATLAB and pick it apart down to a gnat's butt. But, I mean, it's going to give you so much information, like I talked about in the last video, that you're eventually going to come to understanding. It's like, look, bro, teach Bob to play the guitar, and Marilyn there, you teach her how to sing, and I guarantee you your life will get much easier. You'll be a much happier engineer, because if they can't, you're screwed. You could take it into MATLAB and spend the next 2 years fixing her vocal to where she sounded exactly like Whitney Houston, but she would have to have a lot of money. And you get really tired of trying to make her sound like that, because it's just very difficult. All the work you'd have to do, all the concepts and formulas and everything you'd have to understand. to make it happen. Does that make sense? Which means by the time you got done, that, I mean, she would have probably, unless she's really lazy, she could have got sounded close enough to Whitney Houston to where she wouldn't have needed you to do that. Which, I mean, she might get a professional vocal coach or something, or a guitar teacher that can teach them how to do that. I mean, so that's like what I talked about in the last video, how important it is, because we can only go so deep with what we do. And if we go into being an actual engineer, we can fix some things, but it's really ridiculous for what we do. So because we are basically, we do light edits, we do light processing to fix major issues, then we enhance things. And sometimes we do sound sculpting, that's a little bit more in-depth engineering, but it's not that deep, you know what I'm saying, to where we're working with tools that a lot of times are not, is some kind of mathematical laboratory like MATLAB, and that are dealing with engineering principles that, I mean, because we don't have like little knobs to turn around and stuff on our thing, we have to code in formulas and make algorithms, and I mean, it gets really complicated sometimes. Then and it's not the same thing as open your dial, and pushing a button here and then turning a knob there, and yeah, we go, bro. It doesn't work like that, right? I mean, it doesn't, because you're dealing with actual engineering and engineering principles directly. So the tools are set up to try to deal with that, as well as they need to for music production. That's why I've also talked a lot of times that sometimes the algorithms aren't as good as you would hope they'll be, but they're fine for doing music productions. It's not like if you're off by 1 micron, that your spaceship's going to crash into Pluto. It's just not, and nobody's ever going to hear it anyway, and it's like, so we talked about that when we were talking about the size of audio files when it actually gets distributed in one of the other videos in this series, that it's redundant and overkill a lot of times, to the point of ridiculousness, that you have this 192 kilohertz 64-bit wave file and it gets crunched down to this 3 megabyte MP3 at 128 kbps, and you're thinking to yourself, that's a rocket ship, and you spend enough time on it, it could be a rocket ship, goes to NASA, and you've hacked up the rocket ship till it's Presto-Matic toaster, bro. Da-da! Pop it in your iPhone, and da-da-da-da, off you go. You know what I'm saying? Because it's about that much information getting lost. It's ridiculous. So you have to understand that the quality can get lost there, but I mean, people are buying it. If it was so bad where they couldn't listen to it, they wouldn't buy it. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't like it to be better, but I mean, you have to understand, right? But the rocket ship will crash. It will crash. You can't make it into a little toaster oven and sell it to the general public. It's not going to work, right? So that's kind of the difference, right? So, just kind of keep that in mind, that I do not dissuade you from digging in that a lot, but don't get yourself lost in that. And I've tried to make my channel to where I've made it as, down to earth as possible, so that you're not sitting there. Sometimes I get a little deep, but I really try to steer clear sometimes and going, and then, well, because of this formula, and, this mathematical equation, that's just not going to fly, bro. You're going to have to reevaluate and get out a calculator and spend 6 weeks at the blackboard before you're ever going to make that vocal fly. And you're like, what? So, I mean, I really steer clear of that so that I don't get you sucked into that. So you understand, you need to really focus in these areas. And then, I mean, there's a lot of videos on my channel, but because this can be quite complicated, the better of an engineer for music productions you get, that don't worry. I mean, there's been some times that I get going, and from the beginning of production to the end of production, I might have built a rocket ship, bro, because there's some complicated things going on in there. And I mean, I might spend a lot of time on a production where some people might not, but there's been production I've spent a lot of time on them, and it's like there's some really wild stuff going on, and I use a lot of concepts from actual audio engineering, signal processing and digital signal processing to do things sometimes, because it can do really cool stuff, but it's like most of the time it's not needed. It's like saying, I tried to make my notebook downloadable to give you some references to get you digging around, that you can always branch out from that to make you more well-rounded audio engineer as far as music productions are concerned. And the more you dig, the better of an engineer you get, because you'll have a better idea of what's going on. I mean, you're sitting at the console, and if you've got a pretty good understanding of actual audio engineering, digital signal processing, and stuff as far as like NASA environment, you are going to be much more comfortable there dealing with what you're dealing with and being more at ease working with it, understanding what is actually happening and what you're actually dealing with and what you're actually able to do with it, what actually can be heard, and on and on and on and on. So that's my 2 cents as far as it's concerned. So yes and no is the answer. So it really is up to you. The more you dig, the better informed you'll be, and the more informed so that you have more knowledge and more wisdom to do what you do. And it's not likely that it's going to hurt you having more wisdom and knowledge as far as actual engineering is concerned whenever dealing with signals. So, but a lot of times it's overkill and redundant that we don't need all that to do what we do, but understanding it so that if we run into issues or when we're doing things is great. So yes and no is the answer, and I certainly hope you enjoyed this next video on our new series, and I will see you in the next video.